the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down, but holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3. Here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good!
And it's
with
yes,
a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Hunter Burns.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Vlog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys, as always, Josh Marlowe, along with me, which means yet again tonight, we are talking about this team on the field, and we continue to roll along with our previews of this year's roster. So make sure that you guys stick around for that. That's going to be coming up a little bit later on in the show. We're going to take a look at our favorite unit to look at, the defensive line. How could you not be excited about that? Because the last few years, it's been a bunch of hype followed by a bunch of disappointment. So we'll see. Hopefully this year it goes a little bit differently, but we're going to have to wait and see whether or not that is actually the case. But before that, we have an injury that we have to talk about, a crucial one along that in that linebacker core. It's a pretty significant one on the defensive side of the ball. And we also have to talk about some of our takeaways from the press conferences in the past week. We've heard from Mac Brown, but both coordinators as well. So plenty to talk about from what they had to say. So let's, jump into Amare Campbell's injury. And that's the guy in the linebacking core that suffers the injury. It is a broken hand. It is a broken right hand. So this is very similar to what John Copenhaver dealt with early last season. That means that for a linebacker, it's probably even more impactful, believe it or not, than for a tight end. Now, you can tackle with a broken hand, with a club. We've seen it done before, but it's going to make that difficult. It's going to make dropping into coverage difficult, although I don't know how much they're really envisioning him doing that. They are really looking at Power Eccles to be the guy that's going to kind of take over the role that Cedric Gray left behind. So, this is still very, very significant, especially when you hear about how Mac Brown is still trying to find any sort of separation from the group that's behind him to create any sort of depth. So when you saw this news first reported by Inside Carolina's Adam Smith, by the way, yesterday, how concerned were you about this storyline that came out?
It's very concerning because I believe in the talent and the potential of what Amare Campbell can bring to this defense. We've seen it at different points in his spot play over the last year or so. And so, you feel confident that if Carolina gets the production up front, you can actually see your two linebackers thrive. And you've seen, Eccles and Ced Gray and other linebackers thrive since Mac Brown came back, but on bad defenses. And they were the only guys making plays, and they were 4, 6, 8 yards downfield, not at or behind the line of scrimmage. And so, and when you hear Mac Brown talk about it, I think he spoke to the media before this became public. He was stressing the need to develop more depth at that position anyway. And so this is, and this is why, because this is part of it, man. This is a game of attrition. And unfortunately, as much as any other sport, man, the attrition starts before the season starts. Like basketball, baseball, you can go through a month and a half ramp up to your season and not lose anybody. That's not the way football works, no matter if they're no longer doing 2-a-days or not. And we've been told this has been a very physical camp anyway for Carolina, so they're going to maybe be a little bit more banged up than usual going into the opener. So, this is the good news is it sounds like he should be ready to go for the opener. Might not be 100%, but make no mistake, man, it puts pressure on the other guys in that room to step up and be ready to fill his role in a potential absence.
Oh, and it's immense pressure, too, because now, look, yeah, he may be available for the opener. That's at least what they're telling you. But it's hard to believe that he's going to be able to really play the amount of snaps that you were envisioning, which was similar to what Power Eccles and Cedric Gray played last year, because right now there's just nobody that's stepping up. Now, I will say that with him missing the practice time, and they expect him to be back at practice soon, and I don't know if you're with me on this. Could it almost be a blessing in disguise? Because now there's no excuse for those guys not to step up. You're going to be playing with the first team. You know how important it is. Like, for those guys in that room, you need to be preparing as if Amare Campbell is not going to play in that first game. You need to say, look, I need to prepare as if I am going to have to start and play nearly the entire game. That's the mindset they should be taking. And if they do, that could allow someone to create a little separation and show the staff that I'm the guy that even if Campbell does play, at least I'm able to play a significant role for you even in that first game. That's how I'm viewing it.
It's only a blessing in disguise if you actually develop the depth that you want and you need. If he misses practice time, these guys get the reps that they need to get, more experience and get more accustomed to the system. But we get to the opener and Mac Brown doesn't trust him, it's all for nothing. And so it's kind of a catch-22, really, where if those guys step up and they become guys that we can count on to play snaps this season, because Matt Brown's talked about it. Like, yeah, we want Eccles and Campbell on the field, but you also got to be able to rotate those guys in and out of the game, because your linebackers, like every other position on your defense, has gotten worn down because you couldn't put no one else in the ball game. And so hopefully this increases that ability to actually rotate guys, because if not, no matter the schematic changes that Jeff Collins is bringing to this unit or not, if they can't play more people on that side of the ball, this defense is going to have the same issue it's had all under Mac Brown's second tenure, which is by the second half of the year, it's going to be worn down. So we'll have to wait and see. You gotta hope that this staff pushes these guys to get the most out of them, and when we go to Minnesota, we feel pretty comfortable in those reserves being able to play significant snaps.
Yeah, look, I'm not concerned that they're going to be pushing them. I'm more concerned with guys just not being able to step up, because look, this room is incredibly young. There is just no way around it. There is not a guy behind Campbell and Eccles that is a sophomore. There's no one that's more than a second-year player. We're not even talking about a redshirt sophomore. We're talking about true sophomore Michael Short, his class counterpart Caleb Lavallee, And then you're talking about a host of guys. Guy I love in Ashton Woods, who I think has a chance to be a really good player, but is he ready to step up and play that significant of a role right out of the gate? And then you've got the Law brothers. You've got Cade, who is a walk-on that just started playing football again last year. And then you've got Cruz, who just joined the team here in the summer. And so he's having to go through a steep learning curve. I mean, yeah, guys are showing things, but are they really ready to take on that significant of a role? I think we're going to have to wait and see. And yeah, you're right. This can be and that's why I said it could be a blessing in disguise. If somebody steps up, you could look back on this and say, well, that was what really motivated this room and allowed you to find somebody that you can trust. If not, though, then it could put you in a tough spot when you get into that Minnesota game. And there's a lot of times where more than likely you probably end up playing one linebacker on the field and have to figure out how to defend, especially against the run with just Power Eccles on the field. So, I mean, look, they say that he will be ready to go, but when you hear a broken hand, especially for a team that has struggled to tackle, it's hard not to be concerned about that going into the opener. But hopefully, a little bit of time off, it'll allow that hand to heal up, and maybe he won't have to be wearing the full club in that game. As long as he's having to wear maybe a modified club or even a brace on his hand, that I think would probably have us feeling a little more confident going in. But you're right. This is what happens. I think the good news is, and what's really also a little disappointing is to this point. I mean, you even go back to the spring. This is a really healthy group. Remember last spring, I mean, you had Malachi Hamrick within the first week of spring practice got hurt and was out for the season. You lost Julian Randolph, the tight end, to an injury as well for the season back during the spring. But it seems like this year you had really good injury luck, but now hopefully this is not the start of an avalanche of injuries for this team as they get ready to go into the end of fall camp and into install and everything like that, game plan wise, for the game against Minnesota. All right, let's move on to some of the press conference takeaways. As I mentioned, you heard all three major coaches speak within the last week. It was started out by Jeff Collins on the defensive side of the ball. Chip Lindsey was the next to go, and then Mack Brown closed it out on Sunday. And so there were a couple of different things, multiple coaches talking about some of this. Some of these were just things that you heard one coach talking about, but I'll run through. There were really 6 things to me that sort of stood out. And it starts with the quarterback battle. At this point, I mean, I got to be honest, I have no idea where this battle is actually at, because Chip Lindsey talks on Saturday, and the way that he makes it seem is we're splitting reps between the 3 guys. All 3 of these guys still have a legitimate shot to be the starter. You then, and from his perspective, it didn't seem like there was any urgency to really cut down the reps. Then you go to Mack Brown. He was speaking about the group and said that Max Johnson and Connor Harrell are not able to separate. Jacoby Criswell, he did acknowledge that he is still taking first-team reps, but he says that Jacoby Criswell is clearly behind the other 2 guys because he wasn't with the team in the spring. So that continues to tell me that, at least in Mack Brown's mind, he believes that this is a 2-quarterback race and that Criswell is there in case something goes terribly wrong with the 2 guys that were there back in the spring. The other thing that is a little confusing is that, as I mentioned, Chip Lindsey didn't seem to be in a rush to cut down the reps or set any sort of timeline. Mack Brown pretty much said that they hope to have the starter by the time they finish evaluating the scrimmage that they're going to have on Saturday. They're hoping to do that for the entire roster, but primarily a quarterback, they want to have their starter. And this goes back to what he said back when Drake and Jacoby were battling down to the end back in 2022. He talked about when he was at Texas, he ran 2 quarterbacks. He didn't like it. He thought it wasn't allowing them to be successful. It wasn't fair to the kids. I think he's still taking that mindset this time around. And if it's up to him, he is not going to play two quarterbacks in that opener unless if he's going to play two, it's going to be someone starts the game, they struggle real bad, and then they transition to the other one. It's not going to be we're going to alternate drives. He doesn't seem like he wants to do that. But, I mean, I don't know if you're thinking the same thing. It doesn't feel like Chip Lindsey is quite on the same page. It almost feels like he kind of thinks it's okay to have two quarterbacks going in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is Mac Brown may not want to play two quarterbacks. He may not have a choice but to play two quarterbacks. The good news is his track record means that he or his track record is allowed, makes us believe that it's possible to win because he's won with two quarterbacks at Carolina in the past. You go back to the 90s. I think Andrew Jones actually mentioned that in the press conference, and even at Texas. Sometimes he'd play two quarterbacks, and it was rather successful at different times as well. So I think by the time we get done scrimmaging Saturday, whether that's in the day, the nighttime, whatever it is, we'll wake up on Sunday morning, and Mac Brown will have a feeling of who his starting quarterback is. And, whether Chip Lindsey does or not, that's a different conversation. But, his job is to coordinate the offense. And so if Mac Brown tells him this is who I trust the most, this is who I think gives us the best chance, then it's Chip Lindsey's job to build the offense around that guy. And I think that's what's going to end up happening. I think the only way you see two quarterbacks at Minnesota is A, injury, or B, we're down 17-0 at halftime and we need a spark. Mm-hmm. And you go to the other guy and say, what do you got? Because at that point, you're down 3 scores on the road. Nothing really else to lose except the ball game. So you kind of throw all caution to the wind. But, these things have had a way of working themselves out since Mac Brown returned. I have reason to believe that'll happen again this season.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I know there were some people that were trying to read into the press conference and say, well, basically Mac Brown, because he starts by talking about Max Johnson, that shows you that he's leaning in that direction. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think he has a lean at this point. I think he's honestly waiting until after this scrimmage to see. And really, I think this week in general is going to be big. I think someone has to start creating separation. And if they don't, then I think that's when you probably start to get a little concerned. And that may actually make him push it a little bit and really take it down to the end. But I'm telling you, there's motivation from him to find that one guy. One of the other things that's kind of been a theme here of, it was in Jeff Collins' presser. I think Mac Brown has talked about it as well and then talked about it again the other day. The safety position is being raved about as much as any on this team. And I got to be honest, I think there are still, even at the positions that Carolina has been strongest at, maybe outside of running back, but even there, trying to find your backup, working that depth chart out. It feels like the safety spot right now might be the position group that this staff feels best about going into the season. Now, I know that's scary because it's a defensive position, which hasn't really worked out in the past for us. But, I mean, this group really is in a great spot. And we'll break it down a little bit more later on this week. It'll be on Sunday when we talk about the defensive backs. But, I mean, you're talking about Stick Lane finally getting his opportunity to start for the entire season, which I think he should have been doing last year. And I think he was this team's best safety. You got Jakeem Harris coming over from NC State, who has started before. Injuries really took him out of the starting role, but I think he has a chance to be successful. You've got Will Hardy, who I think last year, I've started reading a little bit more into last year for him, and injuries were a big part of it. I don't think they really let on just how hurt he was at points during the season. And you go back and remember the end to the 2022 season where we thought this dude is going to be a standout at the safety position. And then you're also now moving DeAndre Boykins to the safety spot, a spot that I feel like if you watch the way that he tackled out of the nickel spot, fits him even better than having to play a nickel spot where you have so much responsibility and coverage. It's been a long time since I've felt this good about a group on the defensive side of the ball, maybe outside a linebacker, but even there, because you haven't had the depth. I mean, am I stupid to be buying into this hype that we have around this safety group? Because I think this group could be really good, man.
No, because if you listen to what Mac Brown says, it's the only position group he has no concerns or questions about. Like everything that he talks about is, no matter what, I feel really, really good about our two deep. At other positions, I like Kamen Rucker, but we need more from Des Evans. We need more from Bo Atkinson. We love Amari and Hampton. We need to see what Darwin Barlow can do at the running back spot. So it's odd that it's that side of the ball. It's that position group, which has had its fair share of struggles since he came back under now, what is his third defensive coordinator. But the thing about Mac, man, is he's blunt. And so if he's going to tell you how he he's going to tell you how he sees it, and tell you how he feels. And so until we, see them look bad, I think it's okay to believe in what they've looked like, because he said not one negative thing. He's spoken for over an hour since they've gotten into camp. He's spoken about the safety position, whether asked about it or just when answering a question, multiple times. It's not a peep of negativity, not a peep of I've got my doubts, I've got questions. He feels good about that group. And so, it'll go a long way for Carolina if they have finally shored up the back end of that defense.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the explosives that they've allowed over the last few years. It's something that we've heard talked about by every defensive coordinator. And even with as conservative as the defense was last year at times, they still allowed a lot of big plays that would hurt them at certain times. Now, one of the other things that was interesting is Jeff Collins, speaking of allowing big plays and, a conservative defense that we heard that saw Gene Chizik run, he's not going to be nearly as conservative, it doesn't appear, this year. We've heard about the aggressive mindset across the board, but one of the things that he focused on, when talking the other day, is about how he is going to play more press coverage this year. Now, I will say, to be fair to Gene Chizik, I think at one point last year, there was concern about how much he actually trusted that second corner. And that really spanned for probably the majority of the season. Now, when you had Armani Chapman in there and he started to really hit a groove, you probably should have become a little more aggressive. But, I mean, the guy on the other side, Marcus Allen, we know that he's added weight here this offseason. I think that shows you that the staff felt like he was probably playing underweight the last couple of years. And so with him getting bigger and with Elijah Huzzy now back on the outside, I feel like they are much more confident that this is a group that can actually play more press coverage. And I got to tell you, it would be a breath of fresh air considering how conservative this group was under Gene Chizik, which I think, look, it still allowed big plays, but the more frustrating thing was watching games. I mean, you go back to the two games that Carolina played against Miami under Gene Chizik. Carolina won both games, and so he would say, well, isn't that good enough? You let up over 400 yards passing in both of those games because they simply were just taking everything underneath because you were allowing it. That doesn't seem to be the mindset that Jeff Collins is taking.
Yeah, I think the more important thing is I think you have two corners that are built to play that way. Huzzy's instinct and his ability to go get the football allows you to put him, in a receiver's hip pocket and put himself in a position to make plays. You look at Marcus Allen, even if he was underweight or not, his body, his length, kind of Des Lawrence-like with his ability to where I think he can play up at the line of scrimmage and play bump and run and do a lot of different things as opposed to sitting back 8 yards off the ball and giving up, underneath, all those easy receptions. And so, and I think for Marcus Allen, you look at one of the few times, man, he got put in a press cover situation. It was that game against Duke. He had no safety help over the top, and you give up that late touch, or maybe it was the App State game. I don't remember which one it was. Man, from a confidence standpoint, he was ruined. It wasn't all his fault because he had no
Well,
help over
was
the
that
top.
even press? Was that even press though?
Yes.
I don't even remember if it was.
Yeah, no, they moved him up because you were trying to make it harder on him. But I think that's the thing, is that you actually have guys that are built to play that style, and you actually have a coordinator that believes that they can play in that style. Say what you want about Gene, man, and look, we definitely had our critiques of him both stints in Chapel Hill. It definitely felt like his second go round, he wasn't as optimistic about the ability on that side of the ball, because he coordinated better defenses his first time with less talent. He was given more talent the second time, and his defenses were worse, which does not make a whole lot of sense. It was almost like he was coordinating as if he was scared of his own guys. And so, if there's one thing I think that Jeff Collins is bringing to this unit more than anything, is just an attitude of aggression. And if we're going to get beat, by God, we're going to get beat being aggressive, not sitting back and still giving up big plays and a lot of points and a lot of yards, which I do think would be a breath of fresh air if we're giving up points, but we're at least trying to make plays on the football and just not making them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, to me, like I'm okay with at times there are going to be teams that are going to have success, but when you've got this secondary is incredibly talented. It is, and we've seen it, play out with certain guys. I mean, Huzzy and Allen. I mean, what is this? That's got to be the best corner tandem since that defense that you talked about under Gene Chizik back in 2015. Like, I don't remember a group that I've really had that much confidence in corner wise since then. And so I feel really good about those guys. We talked about how much we like the safety group. So yeah, I want to see these guys being aggressive and making plays on the football. Now, of course, it's going to help if your defensive line can actually step up, and we'll talk about them here in a second. But yeah, please do not let teams carve you up with that short passing game, short to intermediate passing game, and just say, well, we're relying on our guys to make tackles. Guess what? It hasn't worked. This group may be a better group of tacklers, but how do you know that? Let's be a little more aggressive with guys that we feel can handle that type of aggression, and let's see if it makes some sort of difference. Because, yeah, if you cut out those easy passes, it's not going to allow these offenses to settle into a rhythm, which is the issue that we have seen over the past few years. These guys settle into a rhythm, and then late in the game, let's take the shots down the field. I mean, that was you talked about the Duke game. That was exactly what happened in that game. Grayson Loftus did not come out throwing bombs down the field. It was, let's get the short passing game going, get our quarterback confident, and then let's open it up down the field when we need to. And they did exactly that. And we've seen that so many times with young quarterbacks, with backup quarterbacks just in general, where they're like, put some pressure on these quarterbacks to have to make difficult throws. Don't give them the easy stuff and let them settle into the game and then say, oh, we're just going to hold on and pray that the guy doesn't beat us late. That doesn't really make any sense to me. And I don't get why that is Gene Chizik's mindset at times. But luckily, we've got Jeff Collins who wants to be more aggressive, and we'll see if it pays off. One of the other things that's being talked about a lot, and Mac Brown stressed it in his first press conference after the first practice, he stressed it again in this press conference, is discipline. And he said the other day, look, we are serious about penalties. We are pulling guys out of drills. If you commit a pre-snap penalty, you're out of the drill. If you commit a post-snap penalty, you are completely out on that drive. We will not even put you back in there. So this is what we've been, waiting for. The bench is a motivator. We've talked about this before. And it feels like at times, especially last year, we heard that this was being stressed to these guys. But I don't know if it was nearly as, I don't know if it was as big of a focus last year as it seems like Mac Brown is making it this year. The fact that that's one of the first things that he's brought up each time, he's saying that guys are also getting physical penalties, along with the penalties that they take on the field, which means that guys are having to run extra, either during practice. If somebody commits a penalty that he really doesn't like, he will make them run laps around the field while the rest of the drill is going on, or they will have to run more in post practice. So, I hope that this is something that they really are stressing, because this has been a huge deterrent for this team the last few years, especially late in the year when guys start to wear down. It seems like that's when these, careless mistakes start to happen. So hopefully this focus in the preseason finally pays off.
It sounds like our head coach has had enough of the crap. And in an era where you can't coach kids hard and you can't discipline them, he's looking the other way. And he needs to, because how many times have dumb penalties changed an outcome of a game or made a game that shouldn't have been close because we're taking unnecessary penalties? And, we've kind of seen it. We kind of saw it with Hubert Davis, where when he first got the job was maybe not willing to discipline his guys and make them run for doing stupid stuff. And then we heard last year about how he was running guys and there was consequences for bad turnovers, bad fouls, whatever. Well, in football, man, penalties, there's a reason why that graphic gets shown. And usually if you look at a box score, the team that commits to less penalties usually wins the ball game, because penalties, they impact field position. They impact whether drives get stalled, whether drives continue. And so the best way to try to lessen them is to really coach it out of them. And the best way to do it is to make them run, because no one likes running. I don't care how in good condition you are, man. No one wants to run, especially right now. It's hot as hell. And so this is something that, and this won't surprise you because of the way that I'm wired. I love this because it sounds like my head coach. It sounds like my head coach is tired of the crap, and you're going to do it the way that I want you to do it, and you're going to play the game the right way, or by God, you're not going to play, because you're not guaranteed to be on that field. Like it is a privilege to be on that field, and so when you're on there are certain expectations. You don't meet the expectation, we're going to run you, then we're going to bench you. I love that. I'm all for it. I'm an advocate for benching players for penalties. And I'm an advocate for running players for penalties. If I could, I'd make them run during the game if they committed a penalty.
You could run them on the sidelines. I've seen it happen before. But look, here's the thing. I think what it shows you is that the last few years, they didn't have the depth to be able to do that. And of course, there are certain guys where there is a little bit of grace. If Kamen Rucker jumps offside in the middle of a game where he has 4 sacks, you're not going to take him off the field. But for guys that, especially repeat offenders, which we have seen it mainly looking at the offensive line, that you have to eventually take these guys out. And that's where hopefully these additions in the transfer portal, the fact that some of the younger guys are stepping up, that allows them to be able to do that. Because, there are times where guys take humongous penalties that just kill you. And you said it best. It's not only happening in games that Carolina loses. To be honest with you, it almost doesn't seem like it happens in as many games, in that many games that Carolina loses. It's more of the games where Carolina can really pull away. They make those games so difficult because they just take a horrendous penalty. And the thing is, in years past, you could take a horrendous penalty. It's 3rd down and 18, and Sam Howell or Drake May are making a throw down the field. Are you guaranteed that your quarterback is doing that for you this year? And that's not to say that these quarterbacks can't do that, but it doesn't feel like there's that same margin for error. So if there's not, then you've got to make up for that somewhere. So hopefully that's something that these guys are realizing, and hopefully it moves forward. Last thing that I took away from this press conference, speaking of the offensive line and the depth that they have there, one guy is really starting to stick out to me. Mac Brown was asked directly about the battle at left guard, which seems to be more legitimate than the battle at right tackle, which kind of shocks me. I really thought that Trevion Green, the way that they were talking about him coming out of the spring, that Ja'Kiah Leftwich would have a real shot to win that job. That doesn't appear to be the case. Instead, Leftwich is a guy that they may be looking to try to put at left guard because he played guard a little bit in his time at Georgia Tech. But there's a true freshman in Aiden Banfield who is really making a push to, if he doesn't start, at least play a significant role for Carolina at that left guard position. So, I mean, to me, it's hard to get super excited about a true freshman being a part of the depth chart along the offensive line, because that's a position that usually it takes guys a while to settle in on. But you look at some of the other guys that Carolina has brought in, these highly talented guys like Zach Rice and Eli Sutton, and it's just never seemed to click. So, I mean, at this point, I'm willing to see, is Aiden Banfield really a guy that's ready to step out there and be a significant contributor? Because, I mean, look, we've leaned on veteran guys the last few years. The offensive line has really struggled. Maybe you turn to a young guy like Aiden Banfield who's just super motivated coming in and is showing the signs of being a really good player right out of the gate, and just let this guy play some significant reps for you. It'll be interesting to monitor as he goes, as we get towards the start of the season. Is he a guy that the staff's telling you will play against Minnesota? And even if you don't see him against Minnesota, is he a guy that starts to appear within the first half of the year for Carolina along that offensive line?
Look, Mac Brown said he's going to play. It's just a matter of really how much and what that role looks like. So you maybe are asking too much for him to start at Minnesota. I mean, because we're junkies, we know, like, look, Minnesota, no, it's not the big house. It's not Ohio Stadium. It's not Happy Valley. That place is going to be an environment on that Thursday night, first night of the year, nationally televised game, a relevant program coming in. We beat them, and we beat them down in Chapel Hill last year. That place is going to be ready to go. And, Mac Brown went as far to say it might be somewhat equivalent to when we opened the season at Virginia Tech. I'm not going that far. Their environment isn't that great. But we saw that environment completely overwhelm our football team. Do you put a young, inexperienced guy in that position? I don't know. But maybe once the game settles in and and you just need to rotate him to keep a guy fresh, or you're not getting what you need out of that spot, you have a guy that can go and do it. And so I'm excited to see him, man, because he's talked about him the way you wanted him to talk about Zach Rice and some other guys you've brought in at that offensive line spot. And so, Mac Brown's not a BSer. So I'm excited to see how much he plays, because I think he's going to have a role starting week 1.
I'm just excited that we have some sort of depth there. I didn't care who it was. And the fact that it's a guy that's a true freshman that could be there for 4 years, who knows, even if he's a guy that comes out and, we see that he's not quite ready just yet, still play him, 4 games, could play him in the bowl game as well, and could redshirt. He can even be there 5 years. So that's something to be really encouraged about with the offensive line. All right, now let's shift over to the defensive side of the trenches, and let's preview the defensive line room. This means the interior defensive lineman, the rush end position as well. So, and the edge rusher spots. So plenty of stuff to talk about here tonight. And look, whenever you start by talking about this defensive line, it all starts with one man, and that's Kamen Rucker, who is looking to build off of a huge season last year. 15 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. This was one of the most productive seasons that we have seen in a long time from a Tar Heel defensive lineman. Probably the best we've seen since Kareem Martin left campus, and that was back in 2013. So the Tar Heels were due, and this is a guy that, look, he came in as a 3-star. He was, starting to get reps early in his career, And I don't think any of us ever envisioned that he would turn into the type of player that he is. The best part, though, is that despite finishing 5th in the country last year in total quarterback pressures, this is a guy that still was not voted first team All ACC and continues to sort of be forgotten about by ACC media just in general when it comes to them talking about the best edge rushers in this conference. I think that's the best thing that could possibly be happening, because that means that the Butcher is going to be even more motivated this year and could be a guy that pushes to reach that double-digit sack mark that has been so elusive since Kareem Martin left campus.
Well, he gets overlooked because he's a good individual player on a bad unit. And also, if there's one thing that you can really poke at his stats, is that a lot of his production came in bunches where he would have big games and then he would somewhat disappear. Guess what? That happens when you play the amount of snaps that he plays. And by the time that Carolina got to November and you had the biggest, toughest part of your schedule, man, this guy was gassed, but still never once complained. He suited up and he put his best foot forward. And so if you get production from the other side and Des Evans lives up to his billing, Bo Atkinson really builds off what was a strong year last year, it could really open things up for Kamen Rucker to really have a special type of season where he reaches double-digit sacks, he has 15-plus tackles for loss, and it's over the length of the season from week 1 all the way to the season finale, not coming in bunches. And this is a guy that, he was at ACC Media Day. This guy came back because he wants to win, and he wants to be a part of that foundation that makes Carolina football at least relevant and keeps it relevant moving forward. So we love him. Excited to see what this year has in store with him. He's changed his number, so I'm excited to see what he looks like, because I think he's on the precipice of having as special a season we've seen from a Tar Heel pass rusher maybe in our lifetime.
Yeah, and you're right about him getting worn down late last season. And it's going to happen when you play the amount of snaps, as you said, but also when you're really at times the only guy that is producing along that defensive line. So it's real simple. We're just going to double Kamen Rucker and make someone else beat us. And the thing was, he still at times was able to produce even while being doubled, while being held. There were plenty of times late last year where you were sitting at home and saying, how can we see this? But the officials cannot see that he's being grabbed around the neck. So, I mean, this is a guy that I believe deserves to be talked about amongst some of the best pass rushers, clearly in the ACC, but also in the country. And I think this year you're really going to get the chance to see that, especially if they have the depth that allows him to stay fresh further into the season. The thing that would also help is if Des Evans finally is able to build off of the promise that he shows in the preseason. He looked good in the spring again, and he's looking good again right now. We hear it every offseason. This is the best that he's looked. And then he comes out, and the production just really isn't there. Look, I thought last year there were some things that you could be encouraged about with what you saw from him. It just was not even remotely consistent, and he is still a huge minus against the run. The thing for him is that this year, it's not just that it's his final year at the college level, but if he does not show pretty early in the season that he is a guy that's capable of providing something off that other edge, Bo Atkinson's going to get a real look here, because Bo Atkinson last year was incredibly productive in the limited amount of snaps that he had. And now he's a guy that's built off of that here in the spring and now into the fall. So for Des Evans, it's time to put up or shut up, because the guy that's behind you, if you struggle out of the gate this season, he should overtake you within the first 2 or 3 games. No questions asked.
Yeah, put up or shut up, I think, is the nicest way to put it. At some point, man, you got to put your jockstrap on and play to what your talent allows you to play at, because his body is one that should suggest where he's a force on the defensive side of the football. He has been nothing but the exact opposite of a force. I mean, he gets washed out more than my clothes when I'm doing a little laundry. The way he just gets moved and gets taken out of the play, and frankly, it looks like half the time he could give a damn, and that's pretty frustrating because of the talent that exists. Because when it shows up, we all go, "Dang, I like to see more of that more often." Because when he does that, we look a lot better as a defensive unit, and we can hold our own up front as a defensive line. And so, look, he's back. I think another guy that's motivated, but man, that's been the storyline the last 3 off seasons. Is he's in the best shape, he's motivated, he's kicking everyone's butt in practice, and then we get to the games, and he's not kicking anybody's butt. He's getting his butt kicked, and so maybe Bo Atkinson will light a fire under him because that was a guy. It felt like from the Miami game last year on, man, Bo Atkinson really was a guy we were talking about every single game and was just in the backfield around the football, making something happen. And, I believe in, veterans have a right, but I want the best players on the field. And if Des Evans is giving us more of the same crap the first month of the season, I'm going to want Bo Atkinson in there because I've never once questioned his heart, his commitment, or his effort. Whereas with Des Evans, that feels like that's the case virtually every Saturday.
Well, I mean, the other thing is you want a veteran in there. Well, Bo Atkinson's been in the system now 3 years. He ain't a rookie.
Nope.
So, I mean, at some point, if a guy in front of him is not better than him, it doesn't matter about the upside or anything like that. No, it's time to play the guy that's actually better. And, I mean, anybody that saw those two play last year, again, there were moments from Des Evans where you thought, okay, maybe it's clicking, especially early in the season. Even when he had those moments, he still wasn't playing better than Bo Atkinson. Bo Atkinson looked like a legitimate pass rush specialist last year.
Yep.
I think you cannot keep him off the field that much this year. Even if Des Evans does start to hit, you got to find a way to get Bo Atkinson on the field. So that's the thing to me is that there's an opportunity there. Which one of those two guys are going to seize it early in the year? Well, speaking of opportunities, there are certainly opportunities on the interior of this defensive line group. And guys that really need to step up. It starts with Travis Shaw, who is a former 5-star, and we have basically seen nothing from him so far in his career. Jahvaree Ritzie, we've seen a little bit more from him, but we need him to be more consistent and not have the type of finish to last year that he had. He just completely disappeared late in the season, was graded out as one of the team's worst defensive linemen in a lot of those situations. And so they need someone to step up alongside of Kevin Hester Jr. The thing with Kevin Hester Jr. is we know what he is. He's a guy that is going to, if guys break through the line of scrimmage, he's going to go downfield. He's going to be able to make a play on the ball, or make a play on the ball carrier. He is not a guy that can get any sort of push up front. The tackle for loss numbers really prove it to you that he cannot create negative plays. And so if they're going to continue to play him, which it appears that they're going to, then you need somebody that is able to, 1, stop the run, and 2, create negative plays behind the line of scrimmage. And when I look at that, it needs to be either Ritzie or Shaw that steps up and finally shows that they are living up to their high school rating, which it was incredibly high for both guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation is for Shaw to be that guy. And I think it was the Duke game, or maybe it was the Virginia game last year where there were flashes where he was making plays. But, it wasn't consistent. Same thing with Ritzie. I think what would really help them is if every other member of the defensive line does their job to the best of their ability. And, you're getting the pass rush that you need. Kevin Hester Jr. is a guy that's not creating negative plays, but is still a guy that can fill a gap and be able to do something. And so I think the best thing for these two dudes is Joshua Harris showed up, and that's all Mac Brown can talk about.
Mhm.
And so I think what you're hoping was kind of some other, and that's the beauty of the transfer portal. I think is you bring in these outsiders that are motivated, that are experienced, that are hungry to win, that are motivating guys that maybe younger, maybe just as older, maybe more talented, but haven't living up to expectations. And so I think for Shaw, God, that high school tape's too good for him to be a nothing burger at the college level. Like, I'm not a guy that watches a lot of high school football tape, but by God, I could see talent, as good as anybody when I saw what that kid was doing. And so it's been interesting to see what ultimately shakes up there. I'm a ritzy guy, but he felt like a guy too that, and I think it was more for him a conditioning issue. That guy by the middle of the season was just done.
Yep.
I mean, he was more gassed than me when I walk up the stairs at work. He had nothing left, and so hopefully he's in a lot better shape because it's a long season. But I do think they could benefit if everyone else up front is doing their job to just focus on one thing and their responsibility. And I think you could see increased production from that position.
Well, you talked about Joshua Harris. This is a guy that Mac Brown was just raving about in his presser on Sunday. And I mean, look, I don't know if it should be shocking. I will say that when you go back and look at his time at State, and then even when he got to Ole Miss, he never really played a massive role, was always just a rotational guy. And look, I'm not saying that he's going to be a guy that comes in here and starts and plays a ton of reps for Carolina. This is not Aaron Crawford coming in here. This dude is 6'4", and he weighs 325 pounds. He's massive. And that might be even on the light side from what we've heard from Mac Brown. He's a guy that is going to be situational. But when you hear the type of praise that he's getting, when you hear the fact that because of his size, he's a guy that can really do a great job of filling holes in the run game, and that's what you need on this defensive line. So I think you're right. This is good motivation for those two guys that we just talked about, because if you don't step up, this is a guy that may take your snaps. And for those guys, I mean, how long are you going to keep waiting to finally break out? With Ritzy, I think you're right. I wonder if it was really just he wasn't ready for the amount of snaps that he was going to have to play. Although, again, he was a guy, that's one spot, the defensive tackle spot especially. They have done a good job of rotating guys there. It's just there's not really a ton of production to speak of. This is the opportunity for those guys to step up. And if they don't, then Joshua Harris, who is an experienced guy who seems motivated, he's going to get more opportunities. I think there's a role for him anyways, but it's on these guys to make sure that they have a significant role and that they're able to do the things that Harris may not be able to do, like get after the quarterback, which I think is an area he'll probably still be a little bit limited in. Now, speaking of guys that can get after the quarterback, I will say that, outside of Rucker and Atkinson, hoping that Des Evans finally shows up, the depth at this position on the edge is pretty good. Malachi Hamrick looked really good in the spring. He's back healthy. I thought he was probably the standout amongst that group in the spring game because we didn't see a lot of Bo Atkinson or Des Evans, and Kamen Rucker was out injured. So he was the guy that really stepped up and caught some eyes. I think he's ready to play rotational snaps if he needs to. Jacoby Cowan, we heard Jeff Collins rave about him in the latest presser. He's a guy that's been in college football for a while now, and did some good things when Carolina put him on the field last year. He, of course, got hurt middle of the season, so that limited his role even more than they already had. And then it looks like Jabron Harvey and Tyler Thompson are guys who have stepped up. So this is a spot, just like across the roster, it feels like we're starting to see at most positions where there seems to be some promising depth. I don't know if these guys are all ready to make major contributions, but it feels like we're in much better hands this year than we've been in the last couple of years in terms of depth on the edge.
Well, and like the most important thing is, man, do they need to play 25, 30 snaps a game? No, they don't. But can they give you 10 to 15, especially early on? So when you're getting in these games late in the season that are ultra important and ultra physical, man, your Ruckers, your Evanses, your Atkinsons, they're not as worn down as they've been in years past. And it feels like Carolina's at that point. Man, you want to play big boy football, you got to have 9, 10 defensive linemen. I mean, if you look at why Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, I mean, heck, even now Oregon, while some of those schools are routinely up there competing for national championships every year, is because they got too deep on the defensive line. Because in a 12-game regular season, and now with the expanded playoff, hell, you can play 15, 16 games. You gotta have 9 to 10 guys. And that's been something that Matt Brown's talked about. They haven't always had it. And it feels like it's taken 6 years, but it feels like you're kind of at that point now where you have legitimate depth that can, yes, you're going to play your best players more often than not. But can you be in a position where against Charlotte, against North Carolina Central and those schools, man, those guys aren't having to play after the middle of the third quarter at the latest because it goes a long way. Fans might not think that, but those hits add up. And so, look, I believe in the talent of a Malachi Hemrick, especially when he's healthy. Jacoby Cowending is another guy that, if it all comes together, I think is a guy that can be a productive member of this defensive line. And so I think the biggest thing, and we talked about with this group, having a new voice at that position group, I think is going to do wonders. Man, Tim Cross might be a really nice guy and might have been an inspirational figure for these guys off the football field. And that's great. That stuff's important too. His job was to get the best out of his defensive line. He did not do that. And now you're bringing in a guy that I think is capable of unlocking everything, every bit of potential that exists within this group, whether it's the starters, the backups, or the guys that are just there in a uniform. And so, look, this is a unit we've been pretty down on, and rightfully so, but they've built the depth. They've recruited the talent. I think they've upgraded the position coach. I think with Jeff Collins leading the way with this new attitude, we should see the defensive line take a step forward in a way we haven't seen it really since Mac Brown's first year back on the sidelines in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and that's how I was going to close it was, look, with all of these guys that we are talking about, and there's other guys that are still going to be battling for roles. I mean, Joel Starlings, Rodney Laura are guys that are hoping to be contributors in the middle. You got the true freshmen, Daniel Anderson, Curtis Simpson, Leroy Jackson, and Peter Pasansky. All those guys, they're pretty much just going to spend the time settling in. And then you've got only one walk-on in the room. I think that really shows you that there's depth in this room. I have heard there. I mean, we've heard for the last couple of weeks, one of our coworkers at WFNZ, Wes Bryant, keeps telling us that this room just doesn't have the talent. That is not the case. Anybody that tells you that, they do not follow recruiting close enough. They do not follow this team close enough. The talent, and I've been saying this for years, and maybe I know that you have pushed back at times and said maybe some of these guys coming out of high school are not nearly as good as their rating tells you. And that's certainly possible. But when it's every single guy, the only guy that has developed this entire time into a legitimate pass rusher, and I mean, no, not taken away from Bo Atkinson, but he hasn't even become a full-time starter yet. But the only guy to develop under Tim Cross that's on this unit is Kamen Rucker. That's it. Des Evans, a guy that was, I think he finished as a high-end 4-star, but was a 5-star most of the time that he was in high school. Travis Shaw, who was a top 10 recruit coming out of high school. Javari Ritzy, who was a high-end 4-star. Malachi Hamrick, who was a 4-star player. And, I mean, none of those guys have developed. They didn't develop under Tim Cross. That's a bad look, man. I'm sorry. That's a horrible look. The two most successful guys on your defensive line outside of Kamen Rucker in your time there were guys that got handed to you. It was Strobridge and Aaron Crawford, and both of those guys were great that year.
Yeah.
And you get credit for that. But at some point, yeah, you can recruit the talent, but what does it matter if that talent turns into nothing when you're there? Now you've got a guy in Ted Monachino who, look, he may not be the greatest recruiter. Hell, he hadn't done it in, 23 years was the last time before this year that he was a college position coach. But he has developed guys at the college level. You want to see that? Go back, watch Terrell Suggs' final season at the college level. He still owns the record for most sacks in a single season when he was back at Arizona State. The guy was a freaking monster because he got developed by Monachino. And I'm not saying that's what these guys will turn into, but look at the success that he had at the NFL level. And then, look, Monachino himself is huge. Then you get a guy in Jimmy Lindsay who comes in as the analyst. This was a dude that was the defensive line coach for LSU for the last few seasons and has been all over some of the nation's most successful teams, especially in the SEC. The fact that those two guys, and now that Lindsay is able to actually be on the field and basically coach these guys as well, that is going to be massive, massive for this group. And I think this year, this is a year that going in, I'm still with this unit, and even to a certain extent with the offensive line. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit for the offensive line, but I still need them to prove it to me. This unit, no, I'm not buying into any of the hype. But the one thing that I will say is that I believe that they are in better hands right now. Will it show up this year? I have no idea. But in the future, you will start to see more guys getting developed along this defensive line. And I feel like that's all that we can ask for. I'm hoping that Kamen Rucker, being the leader of this group, can motivate some of these guys. I'm hoping that if Des Evans struggles, they turn to Bo Atkinson and say, look, man, you play with your hair on fire. We're going to put you out there with Kamen, and you two just get after the quarterback. And hopefully it clicks in the middle for some of these guys, and they finally have settled into the college level and are ready to produce, because this unit has the potential to be a really, really good unit. I'm hoping that it can get dragged out of them this season. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Guys, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Check it out right now. Plenty of coverage about what's going on right now in camp, all those pressers. Going to have Mac Brown's press conference takeaways going up tonight. That was something I was planning on getting up last night, but when the news came down about Amare Campbell, we had to pivot, and I got that up there as well for you guys. Read about that a little more in depth about what it's going to take, for Carolina to possibly have to replace him, at least for the time being during practice. So check that out. And then, of course, we've got all the position previews that you can go back and check on as well. And guess what? We are right around the corner from two of our favorite articles of the year that will then become podcast editions as well. The bold predictions as well as the breakout players. You do not want to miss any of that over there on the website. Podcast side of things, we're going to continue to roll along with this. Wednesday night will be the linebackers, and then we'll move on to the defensive backs to close things down. Special teams, we're not going to dedicate a full show to that. I'm thinking that'll probably be lumped in with the defensive backs. We'll talk about it because it's an important group. I mean, especially this year with some of the stuff that we've heard coming out of camp, back in the spring and now into the fall. So we'll still talk about them. But yeah, like I said, they will not get their own full edition. They'll be lumped in with those defensive backs, but plenty of stuff to look forward to. And then, of course, those two articles that I just mentioned, we'll turn those into podcasts. And then, believe it or not, we'll be right there getting you ready for the game against Minnesota. Remember, that is a Thursday night game. So what we're going to do is we're going to preview that game on Wednesday night before the game, and then we will recap the game on Friday night for you. So that'll be very exciting. Carolina gets a primetime game to kick off the season. We'll see if they're able to start the season fast. But regardless, the entire year we'll have you covered on the Heel Tough Blog podcast. And, of course, over on the website, heeltoughblog.com. Basketball side of things, woohoo, man, things are heating up yet again when it comes to the roster construction. I cannot believe it, but Carolina is potentially looking to add to the front court. Well, Josh has an article up there that you guys can go ahead and read. And keep an eye out. Tomorrow, we will have a podcast edition on the front court and Carolina potentially adding another guy there. Do we see it as something that we should be encouraged about, or do we see it as a panic move from Carolina? Make sure that you guys are looking out for all of that stuff. The most important thing, guys, is that when you wake up in the morning, you want the latest Tar Heel football and basketball news and opinions. The best place to go is HeelToughBlog.com. Check it every day. Well, that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.